I'd like to welcome you all. I'm Francis Seeley from Encaf Climate Action Forum, and this is one of the many forums we do once a month where we deal with issues around climate change. And in this particular forum, we're dealing with the water crisis. Now, it seems strange in this country, doesn't it, to talk about the water crisis when we think we have a lot of rain and that water is as free as the air. But we are, according to the Climate Change Committee, facing a real water crisis, and that by the middle of the century, something like 5 billion litres of water we will be short of per day. And we've got Jess Newman here with us from the University of Reading, who's going to give us some background to the water crisis. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms, and Harry Healy from the University of Birmingham is going to tell us how that works. But before that, we're going to talk just briefly for a couple of minutes to Angela Michael, because the water crisis is part of a wider climate change crisis, which includes heat excess and wildfires and floods and the food crisis. And there has been a film made about the climate emergency, a briefing film with Chris Packham in it, that's been going across the country. And we're showing that on June the 13th in our own borough, in the London Borough of Enfield, and we've had an organising committee doing that. And just before we start with Jess, Angela, would you like to come on and tell us a bit about the climate emergency briefing on June the 13th?
Sure, thank you, Francis. I won't take long. So, a group of experts were brought together by Mike Berners-Lee and Chris Packham in November, and they gave us a briefing about the state of the climate crisis, but also tangible, practical actions that can be taken by government and business to improve things drastically, quickly, both in terms of the climate crisis, but also for everybody's well-being and the cost of living. That's been turned into a 45-minute film, and people are being encouraged to screen it in their local communities. And the film is being followed by a 45-minute facilitated community discussion. So Encaf, a small Encaf group have been organising the event. It's happening at the Dugdale Centre in Enfield on the 13th of June at 2 p.m. We've allowed between 2 and 3 p.m. for the time to allow people to get there and to do the event. It is free. I will drop the link in the chat if anyone wants to book, but you do need to book because spaces are limited. We would also encourage people that live in the borough to invite their local ward councillors and MPs to join the meeting and to watch the film. And the overall request of the film is that as citizens, we encourage the government and we pressurise the government and our representatives to screen the film and to do national emergency briefings akin to what we had during COVID, so that we can all be kept up to date about what is happening and what action is being taken on it.
Okay, thanks. We've got one of our councillors who's joined us today, Doug Taylor. So he probably just heard what you said, which is great. Okay, one other thing, and that is we are on Tuesday, we're running what's called a Wild Weather Cafe, which is based on a World Cafe system of discussion. And we're doing that with Harry and the University of Birmingham. We've done one already in Edmonton, where we're trying to find out what local people think about wild weather extremes, and how it will affect them. And we did that in Edmonton, in one of the most deprived parts of the borough. We're doing it in Cockfosters on Tuesday in one of the more prosperous parts of the borough. So we look at two different situations. And if anyone lives in the Cockfosters area and would like to join us there, and we've got food and we've got everything there laid on. And if you'd like to come, then please drop a note in the chat and we'll get in touch with you. But it will be nice to see you there. We're hoping that out of that, we'll have a report which the University of Birmingham is doing, and also a vulnerability index, which will help us to find who the most vulnerable people are and how we create a strategy around helping and supporting them. Anyhow, so those are our first two adverts. So let's get down to the meeting we've got today, which is on the water crisis itself. And we're going to start with Jess. And Jess Newman is from the University of Birmingham. and she's here now, and she's going to talk to us and it will give us some background before we go into breakout rooms and we get everyone discussing how they think they could address this issue. So, Jess, thank you very much for joining us. I thought for a while I wasn't getting in touch with Jess because all my emails were going into her spam box, but we did manage to make contact, which is great. Anyhow, Jess, tell us a bit about yourself briefly and your background.
Absolutely. Thank you all for inviting me and having me here today. So I'm an academic. I'm a hydrologist at the University of Reading, not Birmingham, but that's all good. Um, and I'm interested in water, essentially, and that can be largely flooding focused. We've got a very big floods department at Reading, but also extreme weather, heat waves, droughts, and water pollution, and all that's kind of tied up in this water crisis. So I've ended up doing much more research with local communities like yourselves, so people who have an interest or want to know more and want to know how to prepare for a future that, as Francis was just saying there, we've lived in a country that for many years has sort of given this idea that we have abundant and plentiful water and it's always raining in London. And we're now seeing that that's definitely not the case. It's either seems to be rather dry and hot or flooding. And that's sort of the difficulty that we're facing. So yes, I'm based at Reading. I do a bit of lecturing and I also do some research in that area.
I mean, you talk about the water crisis and that we're going to face it in the future. But how serious is it? Because, I gather that 14, only something like I saw the figure, only 14% of households are aware of a problem or doing anything about it. So can you sort of, tell us how serious you think the problem is?
I think it is completely serious because only this morning I was asked to come and speak to the BBC about the potential for drought this summer. And when we think back only a few months ago, we were talking about one of the wettest winters on record. So I jokingly said back in January, oh, I'll be on in 4 or 5 months talking about drought. I said that quite tongue in cheek, and it's slightly shocking that I have actually had to come on and talk about the potential for drought. This is very much hitting our everyday lives now. So floods on one side, water stress, water scarcity, being told perhaps that we've had all this wet weather, but now you're basically saying we might have to have potentially use restrictions or hosepipe bans in the coming months. How is that happening? And amongst other things, at the centre of it is this idea of climate change and that the UK's rainfall is becoming just so much more variable. It's big deluges that our system just doesn't capture particularly well. It runs straight off, floods our rivers, floods our houses, and off it goes. Or there is no rain. And then we're still using it. We're still demanding it. We've got many, many pressures from fast fashion and, a pair of jeans that takes, hundreds of litres of water to make, to just having that we could just turn our tap on. We're really fortunate that we live in a country where we have clean water that just comes out of the tap. And when we look at countries such as in the Mediterranean, where many of those countries, like Crete, for example, they have more rainfall than we have, even though they're much more arid. They have a lower population, but they also have a different mindset in how they're engaging with that water. They're not wasting it. And I think a lot of the time, we don't mean to waste it. It's just the way we've been set up over time that we have an abundant amount of water. And that's not the case. And we're seeing it with droughts, hosepipe bans, crop failures, rising food markets, rising costs, wildlife problems, pollution in rivers. I work for a charity where we're seeing, particularly in the summer months, huge levels of pollution in rivers having a knock-on impact. And all of this is centered around water and climate change.
When we talk about climate change, people sometimes still, some people dismiss it and saying it's a bit in the future. And I mentioned about the middle of the century having 5 billion litres of water shortage a day. But it's not a future problem, is it? It's a problem now. I gather 12 million households in the UK suffer from water stress already.
Yes, and we've been very good and I say we as in the collective country, at sort of partitioning that a little bit And a lot of that is driven through the way in which our water has been managed over the past decades. And I could spend a long time talking about mismanagement of water resources by water companies, but I won't bore you all with that. But also, as I said, the message that's been given out, the media approach to a lot of this, flooding, very serious, very hard hitting, very destructive. When we have hot, dry weather, it's painted for us as sunshine and beach days and ice creams. And we don't talk about the water side of it. The fact that if we don't have enough water, this is hugely, hugely concerning. We think about a growing population. How are we going to have enough water for all the people who need it in the next 10, 20, 30 years? At the moment, we're not going to. And it's not just water companies' problem to fix. It's not just our problem to fix. It's everybody has a responsibility to take action and be aware and think about how they can do quite small things, but hopefully will improve the situation long term.
People say, though, we're the United Kingdom. We have a lot of rain. We have floods. And now you're talking about water shortages. There's a paradox here. Why do we have both water shortages and flooding?
Well, it comes back to this idea of very much climate variability. I like to think of the weather as becoming more chaotic. I mean, we still have broadly our 4 seasons, but we seem to flip sort of a whiplash effect from super wet weather to suddenly really dry weather. We had a really wet winter, and now we've had basically 6 weeks with very little to no rainfall. There's been a bit of rain the last few days, but you look into the forecast for next week, we're looking at a heat wave by definition. 29, 30 degrees for multiple days in a row. That's going to put pressure on our water resources. And for many of the people out there, the general public, it won't even be on their mind about the fact that next week and the coming weeks when it's hot and dry, that's going to be having an issue, because they'll just be thinking, oh, it's lovely, hot, sunny weather. It's coming into summer. That's what we want. We've also got to take into account that when we get these very hot, dry periods, it literally bakes our soil. I mean, a few weeks ago, I was outside thinking, I've got a beautiful plum tree that's gone and died. I've spent 5 years growing it and I forgot to water it because I just wasn't thinking. Of course, in April, I need to be watering because it's April and we should be having rain and showers, and we haven't had it. And when you get that very hard, dry ground, we've all seen it all cracked when it's been really warm and dry. And then you get very intense sort of thunderstorm rainfall, that intense deluge. It doesn't soak into the ground. It doesn't make its way properly into our aquifers and our reservoirs where we need it for use. It runs off the surface, floods, and again, doesn't get stored in the system in the way that we want it to. And I always feel really bad saying it, but basically what we need is more of those grey, miserable days that we're sort of traditionally known for, because that's when you get your water and you keep it and you can do stuff with it that you want to do.
Well, we have this crisis and people will ask the question, why? Why do we have the crisis? Is it a behavioral crisis where we as consumers use water badly and waste it? Or is it an infrastructure problem that, we don't have enough reservoirs, we don't have enough piping, we just don't keep up with the demand that there is and the way in which we collect water in this country? Why do we have the crisis?
Well, like many of these, it's sort of a wicked problem. You can't put your finger on one particular thing that's driving it. We aren't being particularly mindful generally as a population in how we are using our water. Compared to a lot of our other energy bills or service bills, water is cheap compared to sort of gas or electricity. So we do tend to just use it without thinking. And that's one of the things really we need to sort of get that awareness and education out to people, that just try and be mindful of the fact that this is not something that's necessarily always going to be there. And people think you're scaremongering, but actually, if we carry on like this, there is that potential in the future. There is clearly problems with infrastructure. In the centre of London, we have very antiquated Victorian drainage. We have a pipe system and sewage network that's set up as combined sewer overflows. So every time it rains, that runs straight in to our sewage treatment works and overwhelms them. So again, we're just not using that water in a sensible way for the population that we have today. And climate change, we've got to put into account that we have a growing population, more people needing water, a much faster way of life. If we think about AI and data technology centers and all that, they draw a huge amount of water. And that's just for running things like running these meetings or running, ChatGPT to help you write something. It's embedded so much hidden in our everyday use. So all of these things come together to sort of create this perfect, wicked problem of the future.
We have this problem of the future and the problem of now as well. So what can we as individuals and communities do about it?
So at the very much individual level, and I found myself doing this last summer, so I'm as guilty as anybody else. When you're hearing on the news that there's really hot, dry weather and we should be looking after our water, then small things like when I was having a shower or perhaps bathing my kids or something, I would collect some of that water, keep it to water my houseplants or put it out on the garden. Having a water butt, if you've got a garden, just to be able to not have to use it straight from the hose pipe, for example. If you've got it stored there, use it. When I'm waiting for the hot tap to run, I don't know what your houses are like, it seems to take forever for the hot water to come out of my tap. So if I can fill 2 saucepans ready to cook pasta on later, that means I don't have to run those saucepans again later. That's just sensible use of water. So at a very much individual level, it's just trying to train your idea of doing things slightly differently. But I was really good at doing that last summer. And of course, then it rained all winter. And I have to admit, I forgot. I stopped doing it because it's like, oh, it's raining. So I'm as guilty of it as everybody else. I think lobbying, MPs and local councillors to take action on this, to be aware of the situation. As I said, flooding gets a lot of attention. And it is the sort of flip side of the coin to drought and water scarcity. They're not completely separate. They go hand in hand in our country. So sort of getting that political and sort of governance pressure is really key. And a lot of this sort of stuff, community-based focus, getting people together, talking about it, coming up with ideas is absolutely invaluable and brilliant to see as well.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for that. I mean, I think you've been through a lot and you've given us a lot to think about and told us about the context in which we're running this forum today. So what we're going to do now is, I hope, gradually move into 2 breakout rooms where you all have a chance to say something and answer some of these questions about what we can do individually and what we can do as a community. But I'm going to introduce Hallie Healy, who is with us today. And Hallie is from the University of Birmingham. She's also on our core group. She's been doing the Wild Weather Cafes with us. And so she's going to introduce how we're going to run the breakout rooms and how they're going to work. So Hallie, do you want to come on and just give us some background as to how we will work the breakout rooms?
Sure. Can you hear me all right? Let me just check.
We can, yeah.
Okay, great. So thank you, Francis. This activity that we're going to do is inspired by a training that actually Paul Everett and I, also an Encaf member, attended with the Local Communities Emergencies Partnership, or LSEP. This was a funded workshop. And their agenda is to help communities prepare for climate emergencies. So we're interested in initiating conversations today around emergency planning related to water, focusing on 2 different scenarios that we're fortunate to be joined by our experts on. So one scenario focuses on extreme heat causing water shortage, and the other is going to focus on heavy rainfall causing flooding. And how it's going to work is when Francis puts us in breakout groups, our experts, Charlotte and Julian, are going to be there waiting for us. And they're going to present these scenarios that we've drawn up, one for each sort of situation: extreme heat causing water shortage and the other on heavy rainfall. And then they're going to ask the people in the room to think about 3 different questions on ways of preparing. And the questions have to do with what needs to be monitored and by who in advance, what kind of information needs to be communicated and how and to whom, and how can communities mobilize sort of on a neighborhood scale to deal with these kinds of emergencies. And so once we're in the rooms, we're going to have like a discussion leader that will be Charlotte or Julian. And then hopefully, well, I think it makes sense to maybe appoint a timekeeper / whip cracker. And also Iveta, my colleague here, is, I think, joining us. She's going to be in a different room than I am, and we're going to make sure these conversations get recorded. And the reason that we want the conversations recorded is because we then want to use these inputs to take to what the LSAT people call a tabletop exercise. So when we go to Cock Foster's, we're going to feed these findings or these points and expand those discussions on a really local level. So yeah, I think that covers it. Francis, is that
Okay,
about
no,
right?
that's fine. Thanks. And don't let that frighten anyone. It's going to be quite an informal discussion, but we're going to use the outcomes of it in the work we do as well. Now, we're lucky to have Charlotte and Julian with us today, and they agreed that they would facilitate it one room each, and they're both come from, you know, quite important organisations. And I thought before we start, I'd get them both to introduce themselves and and for 1 or 2 minutes at the most, just tell us a bit about yourselves so you know who your facilitators are going to be. And I mean, thank you both for doing it. I really appreciate it. So, Charlotte, should we start with you? Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and where you
Yep.
come from?
Thank you very much, Francis. So my name's Charlotte Stannard and I work for the Rivers Trust. That's the National Rivers Trust. And I'm based in Norwich and I've worked for the Rivers Trust for 3.5 years. And initially my role there was to coordinate what's called a catchment partnership. There are 106 catchment partnerships across the country, and they were set up in 2013 by the Cameron government. And really, the intention of catchment partnerships was to bring together all the stakeholders on a particular catchment and make sure that they're all working together. It's easier said than done because, as we know, the water environment is very siloed. So we deal with pollution over there and we deal with flooding over there. So there has been a huge momentous sort of moment. This government has brought in what's called the Water Commission. You probably all know about it. So the government became aware that people were getting very upset about sewage in rivers. So they commissioned this big consultation, and what came out of it last year was that we really need a body to bring together all the facets of water, to think about it in a holistic and systems thinking way, because as Jess has already very brilliantly articulated, the way we deal with flooding undermines how we deal with drought. So we've designed our catchments and our landscapes to gush floodwater out of the catchment and to sea as quickly as possible. But the rainwater is so precious that we need to be holding the rainwater in the ground where it falls. So my role at the moment is focusing on helping DEFRA and the government, along with my team at the Rivers Trust, to try and come up with these regional systems planners where they're thinking holistically about how we plan water. And integrated water management is the latest buzzword. They're doing it in Liverpool and Manchester. They've just started on this journey. Devolution gives us an opportunity here to start thinking more holistically. So I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you for inviting me, Francis. I better stop talking because once you start going, you can't stop with this subject. So
Yes, I know. I have that problem too. Okay, so Julian, you're here as well, and Julian is from Water 21, and he'll tell us a bit about his background, and so you know who he is when you go into the breakout room, if you're in that room with him. So Julian, over to you.
Thank you, Francis, and hello, everyone. I'm an environmental engineer. I had a fantastic mentor when I was a child, which was a long, long time ago. And this is the reason why I do the work that I do, primarily because of my mentor. He was just a brilliant countryman. My community, Stroud, was hit by meningitis during the 1980s in the run-up to water privatization. I have honorary posts at Cranfield School, Postgraduate School of Medicine, and Gloucestershire NHS. I demonstrated the first SUDS in the UK in 1991, followed that up very quickly with the first natural flood management proposals. I tend to work outside policy processes, but very substantially policy processes are increasingly based on innovations that not just me, but the team I'm in have developed. Most recently, we've been retrofitting a major water company's assets with hydro turbines. Should have been done a long time ago. There are answers out there. I'll just bring one piece of data to your attention. In 2000, the head of water resources, Dr. Jeff Mance, went on record saying that changes in farming practice had reduced aquifer recharge and increased flood runoff by 20%. Since then, and I'm not denying climate change, far from it, we're in a terrifying situation. There's been a drastic harm to our soils. So the answers are there, and I'll leave it at that. Look forward to the breakout group.
Okay. Well, thank you for doing that. Right, we're going to go into the breakout rooms now, and this is where I hope it works and we don't have a major tragedy on this.
Right.
When you go into the breakout rooms are random. So let me just say to Julian and Charlotte and Harry and Evita that because they're random, you might find all yourself in the same room. So if you know, Julian and Charlotte, you're in the same room. If one of you can move yourself out, or I'll try and shift you, but you can leave the room and you come back into the main plenary session. And I then will put you in the right room. And same with Harry and the same with Evita. And Harry, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that it's okay with everyone that we record this because it's to feed into a workshop. And also, Francis, were you going to flash up the prompt questions? Because the scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just quickly show you the questions that we want to have. Can you see those?
They're coming, I think. Maybe if people want to take pictures of these key questions as they go into the rooms with their phones, or screenshots, or however you want to do it. I'm going to take a picture right now so that I can remember what we're meant to be talking about. Thanks.
Just let you look at it quickly. And I mean, I know that Julian and Charlotte know roughly the questions anyhow, so that should be okay. So let's stop the share and come back in. Now I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. And as I said, if Julian and Charlotte, you find yourself in the same one, please one of you leave and I'll put you in the other room. And if you're, and if you're in a room without the facilitator, just be patient. I hope I get him or her there fairly quickly. So, okay, let's see if this works. And we're going to go into the breakout rooms now. But what we're going to do now is just get some feedback from the rooms, and then there's time for questions as well. So, Anthony, if you've got questions, then please bring them up. They'll be welcomed. So let's get feedback from each room. First of all, Charlotte, from your room, and Harry, you were both in the same room, weren't you? So, Charlotte, do you want to start that off?
Thank you.
You have to unmute.
Sorry, we were unfortunately Yasmin was speaking as we left the room, and we were talking about grey water recycling and how hard it is to get that routinely into new builds. There's lots of barriers that we need to break down, and Yasmin was making the very good point that all of the new towns that are being planned, that needs to be in it from the get-go. So all of these developments need to be very low water use, and it has to, it's a very real priority. But we started off talking about you know, I don't know if they call it the risk register, but the register that electric and water companies have of vulnerable people. And we had somebody in the room that's on that list and verifies that that works. They do get contacted, but we're not sure if it would be, you know, as effective in an emergency like this. We would hope so. And somebody from an organization, Lighthouse, or is it Lifehouse? I'm terribly sorry if I've got that wrong, but there's an organization that's sort of grown that I think Kevin was telling us about, that is a group of volunteers who are identifying vulnerable people and wanting to create lists and, you know, build up a system, a bit like mutual aid. So there are organizations doing this. And we were very interested to hear from XR in Kings Lynn how they do engagement activities with the community, like picnics and camping, and then introduce difficult topics once they're having a nice time, which I thought was a lovely idea. And then they have to bring their water out of the stream and carry it and deal with it. So it's sort of a learning on the job, really. So that was a really good example. If I've missed anything, Hallie, please do chip in.
I think you've covered some really, really interesting examples. In terms of what should be monitored and by whom, I think we mainly discussed water level monitoring. I presume that means in reservoirs, but also monitoring vulnerable people, and in part through the priority registers, but I think also we talked about sort of community networks, sort of mapping where vulnerable people are and knowing where they are and reaching out to them, making sure they have drinking water, that they're safe, that they have food and whatnot. And I think in terms of how residents can protect themselves, there were a lot of really good ideas, things that are clearly already happening that could be picked up elsewhere. So like Charlotte was saying, the education, the awareness raising, the free water supplies, knowing where disabled and vulnerable people are. I like the idea of mutual aid instead of charity. And there was a focus on the roles that councils and churches and community groups can play to set up cool centers, that kind of thing. Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much, Charlotte.
Yeah, well, it sounds you like you discussed a great deal there, so that's really great. And Julian, do you want to tell us about your group and Yvette? You eventually got into that group as well. So Julian, you're muted at the moment. You need to unmute yourself, Julian.
Got it.
Ah.
Okay, thank you. Right. So we had a good active discussion, nearly ran out of time. In terms of point one, I made the point that most councils have flood wardens. If there isn't one, you can always volunteer. The point was also made that not everyone in the audience was from Enfield, a lot of people from further afield. Pat said it starts now. There's no point waiting for flood warnings. We know floods are going to come. We need to get on with a plan right now. Sally mentioned that her local parish council had its emergency planning out of date. The county council was better. Patrick explained that drains and ditches should be regularly cleared. Historically, the farming workforce would turn to ditching after the harvest. These things are just overlooked now. Food and farming has a huge role to play, both in short-term resilience, providing food for flood refugees, and in the longer term, resolving. I know resilience is the word that we all use, but actually we need to resolve our flood and drought risks. That's an engineer speaking. I don't understand being asked to plan a resilient engineered concept. That's something that has a high risk of failure. Justine suggested look at flood maps, find out if you're actually at risk, and if you are, draw up a flood plan. Sally pointed out that quicker runoff is going into the rivers more quickly, and the quicker the river floods. I made the point that early on in my career, I was an irrigation engineer, and I assure you in virtually every region of the world, we can significantly store enough stormwater to irrigate farmers' crops to double or treble at the least output. So there are really quite straightforward solutions that are being obstructed. They also cover intensification of rainfall. Doug said it's very difficult to predict when flash flooding will arise. Multi-agency approaches. Copenhagen had the great idea of putting urban wetlands in, something that I did a lot of the early work on. Pepe made the point that they can't find an emergency plan anywhere for their area. Make sure, this is an important point, you keep emergency rations, particularly bottled water, handy. Don't wait for government. Well, don't wait for government is, I suppose, the slogan that has recurred throughout my career. I think I better leave it there, Francis. I hope that covered it.
Okay, Yvette, you were in there as well. Do you want to say anything? Rita? You're probably mute.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, Julian has mentioned pretty much all the things. I'm just, and I've come in a little bit later as well. As there was just somebody mentioned about community Facebook page in terms of the successful communication, because communication was one aspect that was talked about quite a bit as well. Somebody also mentioned about birds, and that they had good emergency response team that has been put in place as well, and suggesting that, all the different communities should be looking into doing that, and also the importance of multi-agency approach to emergency planning.
Well, that sounds fairly comprehensive as well. And I mean, there's some things that came out of that about actually dealing with flood when it happens, because there's one person said, I think it was Doug, sometimes you don't know when flash floods are happening. On the other hand, how do you prepare well in advance? And very often I've found when I've looked at local authorities, they're very good at preparing something when it happens, doing something when it happens, but they don't deal with a long-term preparedness strategy. And it's only when a crisis happens that they begin to realize they have to do that. We're going to open this up now to other people who want to make a point or ask a question, and then we'll talk about where we might go from here. So, Bernie, you had your hand up first.
Yes, thank you very much. Enfield is quite lucky with water supply because we've got two reservoirs in the east. We've got in it the River Lee. There's a new river which has been there since 1613, and we've got three brooks running from west to east downhill. And recently, the council has been increasing the number of wetlands, particularly in Albany Park and particularly off Furs Lane. And this is helping to store water and slow down the runoff, so that instead of, for example, the Turkey Brook running like Billio every time it rained, now it spreads out into the wetlands in Albany Park. And I think the key here is water retention. And this is a point made quite strongly in our group in response to the ancient but rather disastrous nowadays practice of clearing ditches. We want to retain the water in the soil rather than getting rid of it. And alongside that, one of the things we can do locally is to not cut the grass as much. I have an allotment which is covered with various things. I don't have to water it because the soil doesn't dry out. I've covered it with trees as well. If we stop cutting the grass every 5 minutes around our estates and our playing fields and allow it to grow, that will allow the soil to retain more water, and then we'll lose less of it. It'll be there when we need it. Thank you.
So we're in no mo may anyhow. Kevin, you've got your hand up next.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we've concentrated a lot tonight, understandably, about flooding, but if you look at the data, as I understand it, 70% of the water we use goes to essentially our animal agriculture. So what we haven't talked about is how changing our diet, many of us on the call probably have already done that, but how changing our diet can have a major impact in the long, medium and short term on our water use.
Okay, and Patricia?
Hello. I am a member of a group that lives near Havant Thicket Reservoir, which is currently under construction on the south coast. At one point, that was considered as the solution to water shortages in the southeast. Now, due to the change of measures of what is necessary, Southern Water have now decided they want to do water recycling, which is recycling sewage using reverse osmosis. And they are actually in the process of applying for a development consent order for that at the moment. And I gather that a number of other water companies are also looking at that as well. We are part of a group which are opposing this, and we have advice from a water company professional who is also an ecologist, who is arguing that there are much more sustainable ways of holding back water, given that we're going to have much more rain in winter. We only capture about 2% of the rain which falls. And there's a possibility of storing water in closed aquifers, looking at building more reservoirs rather than reverse osmosis, and also capturing river flows at just above the tidal weir, so that one of the concerns in our area is that we want to preserve our chalk streams. We have several chalk streams which are under threat through over abstraction. But there is a water professionals group who have identified that you can leave all the water in those rivers and just abstract above the tidal weir. So those things are being pushed, but it seems almost inevitable that we're going to have this incredible costly reverse osmosis. It does work in some places. It is essential in some places. One of the concerns is that some things are still getting through the reverse osmosis process. I think I better stop there. I've been going on for too long.
No, that's okay. That was really interesting, and I like the way you talk about getting a professional group together, and that's something we might think about doing locally. Angela, you've got your hand up.
I was just going to ask, when Jess was talking at the beginning, she was talking about examples of places like Crete, I think, that have similar or water levels or lower water levels to us, rainfall than us, but manage their water much better. And I was just wondering what sorts of things they do there that we could learn from.
Yes, are you there that you can respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're quite behind the times in terms of like water recycling. So actually just recycling water like we would other waste products that we have. I mean, we tend to just sort of let it go and then wonder why we don't have any. I think they just have a much, if you speak, when you speak to people who live in the Med, they just have a different relationship with water. They understand that it's not a finite resource and that they have to be careful with it. And I heard a really good sort of analogy once. Somebody said that we want to make wasting water the same as blowing smoke in a baby's face. Like at the moment, many of us just are like, yeah, it's there, it's brilliant, it's one, you have it all the time. And I would say particularly in the last few years with those really heat, like that 40-degree heat we had in 22 and the many heat waves we had last year, it's just becoming really critical now that this isn't something that we can just sort of keep kicking the can down the road, and we have to actually act on it. And as with flooding or drought and water generally, it's about changing the mindset. And I strongly believe a lot of that has to be done at the very young ages. So going into schools and things like that, and bringing that generation up with a different mindset on how we use water. But we just don't do it here. We've not invested in water recycling at all, really.
Okay, we've got two other people with their hands up. First Julian and then Doug. Julian?
Just quickly to follow up on the points, particularly Patricia's point, typically between 2 and 5% of rainfall is used or abstracted in any catchment. It's just outrageous. We can have ample water by planning properly. We've lost 1 million ponds in this country in the last 100 years. Every central government policy, it appears, has been designed to create water scarcity. And yes, decisions in terms of what we eat, it's very simple. Farm chemicals are totally toxic to the water environment, not only in terms of water quality in aquifers and rivers, but actually how the soil responds. So virtually all our pasture land, for example, is tainted by a toxic fermentation product. It's used as a wormer from a soil bacteria. There was no safety oversight whatsoever before this was given to farmers who apply it willy-nilly. Glyphosate, we've just heard, oh, it's probably not safe from a human health perspective. The climatic effects of glyphosate are horrendous. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Right. Thanks, Julian. Doug, you've got your hand up.
No, I'm not unmuted, but I am now. Two
Okay.
quick points. Firstly, in terms of what Jess said, I think there is a significant behavioural issue that we need to confront. So the demand side of this water equation, whether it's because we waste water, we don't value water, I think there are some things that need to be considered and discussed around how you get to a situation where we all value water more than we currently do. But on the reservoir issue, there is a discussion around a reservoir in Oxfordshire to increase the ability to supply London and the counties above London. And the problem is there's always going to be local opposition to such a project, and that's natural. But the time frame of agreeing this is something that is reasonable, feasible, and can be funded. Then going ahead and acquiring the land and building it is 20, 30 years from now. And so I think that discussions about the need for reservoirs is an important one to have, but we have to recognise that unless there's an absolute fundamental change in the approach that we have in this country to planning such, and we've seen this with other big infrastructure projects, it is a long-term project. Nobody's mentioned desalination, and of course Thames have one desalination plant in Beckton, which they turn on once a year just to see if it works. But that, I don't think, is currently the solution, because it's a hungry, energy-hungry way of creating drinking water from seawater. But in the longer term, desalination may be something, if there's change in the technology, that could be used.
And Patrick?
Okay, three things, and I will keep this brief, and I'm speaking as a water engineer. If you've had a flooding experience, you won't need to look at flood maps to see if your house is likely to flood. Secondly, grey water. I'm happy to use household wastewater for the garden, i.e. the flowers, but as an allotment holder, I would not want to use my household wastewater on any food-based garden or allotment waterings. And thirdly, we hear a lot about reusing grey water within the house, but be aware that it's almost impossible to reuse grey water within the house without increasing your carbon footprint, because you need electricity, you need filters, you need pumps, etc. Thank you.
Okay. Yasmin, you had your hand up and it went down again. Are you there?
I am, Francis, but I thought better of it. But I will still share it very quickly as somebody who originates in a country where, unfortunately, disasters are common, Turkey and Bangladesh. I've had quite a lot of experience about not having water and having to carry buckets of water and so forth. And just thinking that we have populations in Enfield who will have had a lot of experience in this respect. And perhaps maybe a small project could be, an exchange of information between maybe some communities who've experienced this with, others who haven't, just to give people an idea of a real life, what it's like, because there's so much knowledge actually in the community, that can be scaled up, for people of London. And I just think that, something like Encaf would be great at doing this. I mean, the community cafes are going so nicely. This might be the kind of area in which you could have such a discussion, and you will come across a lot of very recent knowledge. I mean, you had two massive earthquakes, for example, in Turkey, where the water, electricity, internet, blah blah, the whole thing went out. And in Bangladesh, this is a annual occurrence. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone else at all? No? Okay. Well, I mean, that's been a really good discussion. And where do we go from here? Sorry, we've got one other person with their hand up. If we just take one more comment, then Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen?
Hello. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you
We
hear me?
can. Yeah, we
Oh,
can.
good. Because I'm at Small World Festival in Kent, and over here they use old compost toilets, and it's really interesting to see how the land is used and how the water is used. Today we had a problem with the water and how everyone shared water and how we think about water. And when you're in the field, you're so conscious of you've got to carry that water to your tent or whatever. And I think that in other communities around the world, we've learned how to really appreciate water, whereas the modern living is all about just let's shower every day, let's hose down the car, let's hose down the drive, and the products that are available to do this constantly without consideration of how much water is involved in these issues is something that's really important to bear in mind, that we've got so much to learn from the indigenous communities, from the people who live on the land, with the land, and in harmony with the land. And I don't know if any of you are available and would like to come. At Small World, I run the Speakers Forum and the campaign space, and I would absolutely, listening to all of you, I would really welcome some of you to come and talk about these issues at Small World if you're available at short notice. If not, maybe in August, because I run it in August as well. So yeah, please get in touch if you are interested.
Okay, Mary Ellen, could you put your contact details in the chat so that people can know how to get in touch with you? And then okay, if you could do that, that'd be great. And then one final comment before we sort of conclude with a final statement from Phoenix. Hi, Phoenix.
Hi, Francis. I thought absolutely brilliant Encaf webinar. Really enjoyed it. Great to see the breakout rooms and the discussions and everyone's feeding. I think, this is a really big issue. There are lots of solutions, that we could be working on. I think the main thing is to be run scenarios before these things happen, be as prepared as we can, build our communication networks. One of the examples came up in that in Valencia, the big floods that happened there. The people were actually really shocked that it took the government about a week to turn up with resources. And the more we can build our citizens' response networks with communication, we need physical spaces to meet and organize and store equipment and torches and food and whatever it is, so that when these things happen, we know where to go to. And any preventative measures, there's a Friends of Enfield chase there that are planting trees along the floodplains of Enfield. Anything we could do from roof gardens. I love one of the examples about taking up some of the I think Mariella might need to mute there. Taking up the concrete in Holland, and so it's less flooded. There's lots of things we can do. I went to the Bonn Climate Summit, and there was a Korean group had designed whole sponge cities and how we deal with that. And we need to tackle this on every level, but mainly have the physical spaces we can meet and build up citizens' response, groups and communication networks. Thanks very much, Francis. Brilliant webinar. I'm interested to see where this goes to LCP or something afterwards.
Yeah,
Explain
that's the
afterwards where it's going.
London Climate Emergency Project, which comes out of the GLC. Bob, you've put your hand up since, but we've really got to finish. So could you make your point really briefly?
Yeah, I'm just going to say that back in October 2015, I ran a science cafe in Basingstoke about planning for the Thames estuary. And it was surprising how little planning had been done by that. And one of the things that has come out, I think, in the discussions is slowing rivers down and making sure you've got places that can flood rather than just trying to get water out as quickly as possible. Because that was one of the main reasons for the Thames having a problem. And they're not sure how long the Thames barrier is going to continue to be able to function because of it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I mean, thank you, everyone, for your comments, and that's great. I mean, I think some of you recorded the breakout rooms because unfortunately Zoom doesn't record the breakout rooms itself, but I think people did it on their phones. So we've got the information there. We've recorded all of this. So Hallie and people in the University of Birmingham and the researchers who are working on our wild weather cafes to look at vulnerability in specific locations will put this together with this and come out with a report, I hope, which will help us look at how we can develop a community resilience strategy, which is not just top down but bottom up as well, which involves the community. And secondly, how we can then take it forward in other ways by using this forum to look at other specific problems, not just water shortage, but food shortage that we have already, but heat excess, wildfires, sea level rises, air pollution, and so on, and seeing how we can develop a strategy on that. Then we want to see how we can develop that together with the projects we go on. And Phoenix mentioned the importance of tree planting. And we now have got together, I think, 10 local businessmen who are willing to sponsor trees in some of the more deprived areas of the borough. And we want to get a meeting in a couple months from now with the officers and the council and other people as well to see how we can make that operational. And also to look at how we can develop a strategy for preparedness. In 2003, when Europe had a heat wave that killed 70,000 people, Paris bore the brunt of it. They didn't have a strategy at all. And people had to walk something like 30 minutes or more to get to a cooling centre. But after that tragedy, they've got a really good strategy now. No one is more than 7 minutes away from a cooling centre. In Enfield, we don't have that key cooling centre. If you look on the map of cooling centres, we have about 4 identified. They're all libraries, but we haven't worked with the faith groups and the community groups and looked at the shading of trees and mapped it out. And I think those are the things we can begin to do. So I think we're beginning to look at those generally. And in the water issue, we'll take everything we've got from here and see how we can develop that. And Hallie, I think, has had to go because she is in Birmingham at the moment and she's speaking at another meeting immediately after this. She's pretty busy. She's going to work with her researcher who came to our Edmonton Cafe, and we'll have a report that we're going to present to a joint meeting with Local Motion in July. And we'll have a 2-hour session on that. And we'll talk about how we're going forward. And we can then report back to you through our newsletter, because we've got all your email addresses, so you can go on our newsletter list and we'll report back to you about what we're doing. So it looks like a pretty busy time ahead for us, but quite an exciting time as well. But anybody else want to say a final remark before we close down? No, okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jess, for joining us. That was great. And, you started it off. And for Julian and Charlotte for doing what you did in facilitating the groups. Sorry, we had a couple of minutes of trouble getting you on, but thank you, Angela, for coming to the rescue and getting us on the breakout groups so that we didn't break down. We did go into breakout. Well, thank you, everyone. And this will be recorded apart from the breakout rooms, and I'll put the recording of this up in the next few days on our YouTube channel and send it out via newsletter so you can see that. And those who registered and didn't come today will get it too. And by the way, this is the most registered forum we've ever had. 119 people registered to come onto this, which is pretty terrific, really. So I'm really pleased with that. So thank you, everyone. And I hope we'll see you again at future events as well. So shall we end this now? And thank you.